Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Vox podcast.
And welcome back. Today we're strapping in for a pretty wild ride. It's a high-velocity, darkly humorous, and just utterly chaotic trip around the world.
It really is a journey into existential horror that's somehow hilarious.
Exactly. We are tackling the greatest of the Enlightenment satirists, François-Marie Arouet, but, everyone knows him simply as Voltaire, and his explosive 1759 novella, Candide, on Optimism.
Reading Candide is an exercise in mental whiplash. It really is. It's just this non-stop, exhausting barrage of bad luck, profound cruelty, and cosmic disaster. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this cascade of calamities. We need to see exactly how Voltaire, this monumental philosophical voice, used this incredibly fast-moving, darkly funny fiction to just absolutely dismantle the philosophy of the time.
The prevailing one, yeah, Leibnizian optimism. That's the perfect way to frame it. We're not just, enjoying the satire for what it is. We're treating the story itself as a precise philosophical weapon. We need to really get into the weeds on the theological and metaphysical stance he was attacking and, crucially, why he chose such a shocking, rapid-fire, almost cartoonishly violent style to prove that philosophy was just unsustainable.
So by the end of this, we should have a handle on how he shifts the whole argument away from abstract ideas towards something concrete.
A radically pragmatic alternative for how to live that I think still resonates so much today.
All right, let's get into it. Before we jump into the flying sheep and other assorted body parts of the novella, we have to ground ourselves in the man himself.
Voltaire.
Voltaire. He was so much more than a novelist. He was a lightning rod for political and intellectual upheaval. So can you give us a snapshot of who this person was in the, tumultuous 18th century?
Well, Voltaire, or François-Marie Arouet, as he was born, was maybe the quintessential figure of the French Enlightenment. He was witty, politically charged, incredibly prolific, and just perpetually in conflict with authority.
And it started early for him, right? He was known for his sharp tongue from the get-go.
Absolutely. His early life was just one run-in after another with the French establishment. He wrote this really scathing, very readable satirical verse that targeted powerful aristocrats, key government figures.
This wasn't just like an annoyance for them.
Oh no, satire was a dangerous weapon in 18th century France. This got him thrown in the Bastille, not once but twice. The first time was for 11 months.
Oh, wow.
So that early, very real conflict with the state really cemented his identity as, a political dissident and a champion for free expression.
It sounds like he learned very early on that words have real-world consequences. That must have shaped his decision to write something so overtly critical like Candide later on.
It had to have. And after one of these conflicts, he spent some time in exile in England, which turned out to be absolutely pivotal for him.
Okay, so what did he find there?
He just immersed himself in English thinking. We're talking John Locke on government and Isaac Newton on physics. This experience just profoundly shaped his whole outlook, especially his fierce commitment to religious tolerance, freedom of speech, and the whole idea of separating church and state.
So England gave him a kind of model for a more liberal society.
A practical model, yes. And it's also important to remember he had this incredible, sustained intellectual partnership that was so essential to his productive period.
You're talking about Émilie du Châtelet.
Exactly. For 16 years, he had this relationship with her, and she was an accomplished physicist, mathematician, a philosopher in her own right. They were true intellectual paramours.
So not just a romance.
No, not at all. They lived and worked together, studying philosophy, performing complex scientific experiments. Their commitment to knowledge was just staggering. They built up this enormous library of around 21,000 books.
21,000. That's an unbelievable number for the time.
It's almost impossible. Their home wasn't just a home. It was a high-level research institute. It really shows Voltaire's deep engagement with scientific rationalism right alongside his philosophical critiques.
And yet, despite all his anti-establishment feelings, he later moved right into the heart of power, serving one of Europe's most ambitious kings.
That's right. In 1750, he accepted an invitation from Frederick the Great of Prussia.
The Enlightenment king.
The self-proclaimed one, yes. He corresponded with intellectuals all over Europe, and he brought Voltaire to Potsdam, made him a chamberlain, gave him a huge salary. Voltaire had this idea of a philosopher king, but, well, life at the court proved to be pretty confining.
I can imagine.
Their philosophical and personal differences created friction pretty quickly. Frederick was an autocrat, and Voltaire, for all his admiration of the king's intellect, he chafed under the constraints of court life. and especially the king's often brutal politics.
Okay, so by the mid-1750s, when Candide is being conceived, Voltaire is already this well-established, highly controversial, deeply experienced figure. He's seen the best and the worst of Europe. How did his turbulent life finally wrap up?
His later years were spent near Geneva, where he just kept writing prolifically. He only went back to Paris in 1778, right before he died.
And because of his constant criticism of the church.
His unrelenting, caustic, anti-clerical criticism. Yeah, he was denied a Christian burial in Paris. There's a famous story that on his deathbed, they asked him to retract his criticisms and make peace with the church.
And what did he say?
He reportedly quipped that it was no time to make new enemies. His friends had to bury him secretly at an abbey in Champagne.
But he got the last laugh, in a way.
He certainly did. A sign of his immense influence came later. He was seen as a heroic forerunner of the French Revolution, and in 1791, his remains were ceremonially enshrined in the Pantheon in Paris.
That's the turbulent background of the author. So let's shift to the work itself. What on earth provoked Voltaire to write something as harsh and relentless as Candide in 1759? It feels like he took the polite philosophical debates of the era and just put them through a meat grinder.
That analogy is perfect, actually. Because the philosophical problem stopped being abstract, it became a brutal, undeniable fact of life. There was one direct, monumental catalyst for this book.
The Lisbon earthquake.
The Lisbon earthquake of 1755. This was a cataclysm of almost unthinkable scale, a massive earthquake, then tsunamis, then fires. It just devastated one of Europe's great capitals, and on All Saints' Day, no less.
Why was that particular event so challenging philosophically? I mean, natural disasters had happened before.
Because the existing philosophies, especially optimism, had ways to sort of rationalize human evil. War, theft, you could argue they were necessary for free will or for teaching moral lessons. But the Lisbon earthquake was an act of God's nature. It was mass, indiscriminate, irredeemable evil that you couldn't just explain away as having a best end or contributing to the general good. If this was the best of all possible worlds, why did God destroy thousands of innocent people in a random disaster?
So Voltaire took this real-world tragedy and used it as a launching pad for his fictional attack. He basically created a literary lab to test the limits of that philosophy.
Precisely. And Candide needed a very specific literary form to deliver its message so effectively. It's what's known as a conte philosophique, a philosophical tale.
Meaning its main purpose is to explore an idea.
Right. But it's also a satire, a picaresque novel following the misadventures of a hero, and kind of ironically, a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story. Though, as the sources note, not a very serious one.
The rapid-fire style seems so central to his critique, doesn't it? The sheer number of horrors packed into such a short book.
It's the delivery mechanism for the philosophical poison. Voltaire said his goal was to bring amusement to a small number of men of wit, combining humor with a parody of those old adventure romance plots.
But the style itself is part of the argument.
It is. The tone is so bitter and matter-of-fact. It treats mass death as coolly as a weather report. This short, light, rapid approach lets him just pile tragedy upon tragedy on the same characters over and over again.
I think that's the key. The pace means you can't linger on the suffering. You're just slammed into the next awful thing, which denies you, the reader, any time or space to try and justify the evil.
Exactly. It forces you to acknowledge the vast, chaotic scale of human and natural evil without the luxury of pausing to rationalize it. If tragedy piles up fast enough, the idea that all is for the best becomes not just wrong, but actively ridiculous.
Let's unpack that central target then, Leibnizian optimism. We mostly know it now through the caricature of Pangloss, but what exactly was this serious philosophical doctrine from Gottfried Leibniz that Voltaire was attacking?
He was attacking a very sophisticated theological system called theodicy. Leibniz was trying to solve the classic problem of evil.
Which is, if God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, why does evil exist?
Exactly that. And Leibniz's solution was this conviction that all is for the best in this, the best of all possible worlds.
So the argument was that God had to choose from an infinite number of possible worlds to create.
Precisely. And because God is perfect, he chose the absolute optimal arrangement, the one that maximizes good and minimizes evil, even if that minimum still includes suffering. So everything that happens, no matter how awful it seems to us, a war, a disease, it all happens for the best end. It's a necessary part of the general good.
Which sounds comforting on a cosmic scale, but as you said, it completely collapses the second you're faced with something like the Lisbon earthquake.
It becomes absurd immediately. And Voltaire highlights this absurdity through Professor Pangloss, Candide's mentor. Pangloss is a follower of Leibniz, and he gives his doctrine this comically long name, Metaphysico-Theologo-Cosmologo-Nigology.
That name alone tells you it's a parody of intellectual pomposity.
It is. It's just a glorious pile of jargon meant to sound authoritative but ultimately mean nothing. It's a jab at the whole academic establishment. And Pangloss's logic is famously flawed. He's always mixing up cause and effect to justify everything.
Let's get into that specific line of reasoning, because it just perfectly encapsulates the whole critique.
It does. Pangloss says, "It is demonstrable that things cannot be otherwise than as they are, for as all things have been created for some end, they must necessarily be created for the best end."
Okay, that's the premise.
But then comes the ridiculous proof. Observe, for instance, the nose is formed for spectacles, therefore we wear spectacles.
The nose was created for spectacles, not that spectacles are made for the nose. It's a complete inversion of reality. It's the ultimate confirmation bias.
And he defends this idea to the bitter end. He keeps repeating his mantra, all is for the best, even when he's diseased, starving, tortured, hanged. Voltaire uses Pangloss to ridicule anyone who passively accepts this theological justification for suffering.
Now we meet our hero, the impressionable Candide. His name itself means simple or sincere. He's the blank slate that Voltaire is going to write the world's harsh realities on. Where does his story start?
He starts in what's explicitly called the Edenic paradise of Castle Thunder Ten Tronckh in Westphalia. It's this microcosm of a sheltered, outdated, aristocratic life. An isolated, perfect bubble where Candide is a loyal, though maybe incompetent, student of Pangloss.
So he completely believes he's living in the best of all possible worlds.
100%.
This perfect world, the basis for optimism, has to collapse quickly for the story to work. So how does it shatter?
It ends abruptly because of a scene the author ironically calls experimental physics. Candide is in love with Cunegonde, the Baron's daughter, and Cunegonde sees Pangloss sexually engaged with Paquette, the chambermaid, in the bushes.
Experimental physics is just perfect Voltaire.
It's pure satire. So, inspired by this physical demonstration, Cunegonde entices Candide to kiss her. This is the innocent infraction, the tasting of the apple, that ends paradise.
And the Baron catches them, leading to his immediate violent expulsion.
Yep. For this minor transgression, Candide is kicked out of the castle, and the shattering of his perfect world is instantaneous. He's captured almost immediately by recruiters for the Bulgar army.
And we should be clear, the Bulgars aren't just some random army.
Absolutely not. The Bulgars are a direct allegory for the highly disciplined Prussian army of Frederick the Great Voltaire's old boss, and their enemy, the Avars, represent the French. The whole sequence is a bitter satire of the ongoing 7 Years' War.
The transition from philosophical debate to physical abuse is incredibly fast.
It's brutal, and it's designed to obliterate Candide's theoretical understanding of the world. He's coerced into the army, flogged repeatedly, he barely escapes execution, and then he's forced into a major battle where thousands are killed for no discernible reason. He goes from perfection to carnage in just a few pages.
Candide's journey is just a non-stop accumulation of disasters. He's fleeing one catastrophe and falling straight into the next. Let's follow his descent after the war.
After escaping the military, he gets to Holland and meets Jacques the Anabaptist. Jacques is important because he represents genuine, practical human goodness, not abstract dogma.
So there's a moment of hope.
A brief moment. Jacques gives him food and money, but then he finds his old master, Pangloss.
And Pangloss, I'm guessing, is not doing too well.
No, he's a wreck. He's a beggar, suffering from advanced syphilis. He got it from Paquette, linking the fall of their ideal world directly to its contamination. Yet, even diseased, he maintains the doctrine.
How on earth does he rationalize getting syphilis?
This is a classic part of the satire. He claims the disease, which he traces back to Columbus's men, actually contributes to the general good.
Oh.
Because without it, we wouldn't have chocolate and sugar from the New World. It's the height of absurd justification. He's cured by Jacques, but only by losing an eye and an ear in the process.
So the body is mutilated, but the doctrine is intact. Then they set sail for Lisbon.
Right, with Jacques. And the journey is a disaster. A violent storm hits, the ship is wrecked right as they arrive. And Jacques, the one truly moral man, is the one who drowns.
Undermining the idea that virtue is rewarded.
Totally. And Pangloss tries to justify it, but Candide is starting to doubt. Then, the second they step on shore, they experience the real-life Lisbon earthquake.
This is where Voltaire stops theorizing and just confronts you with history.
It's devastating. 30,000 inhabitants are killed. And to compound it, the authorities decide to prevent future earthquakes by holding a ritual sacrifice. They choose Pangloss and Candide as heretics.
So Candide sees Pangloss hanged and is flogged again himself.
Yes, it shows that chaos is met not with order, but with human cruelty masked as religious order.
After the earthquake, Candide is reunited with Cunegonde, and we learn about the old woman, her companion. Her story is just unbelievable.
It's necessary because it shows that Candide's suffering isn't unique. It's the universal condition. She was the daughter of a pope, kidnapped, sold into slavery, saw her mother drawn and quartered.
And then there's the infamous detail about her physical mutilation.
Yes. She recounts that during a siege, her captors were so desperate that one of her buttocks was cut off to feed starving soldiers. And she survives, noting with this dry horror, one does not always die of it.
That detail is there to show the world's complete indifference to human dignity.
And to normalize extreme suffering. After this, Candide and his new valet, Cacambo, head to South America, where Voltaire takes aim at organized religion.
The Jesuits in Paraguay.
Exactly. They are captured by the Orellans, an indigenous group, who mistake Candide for a Jesuit because he's wearing a stolen Jesuit uniform, and they prepare to eat him. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this podcast.
So how does Cacambo, the pragmatic one, get them out of this?
With brilliant rhetorical maneuvering, he argues that Candide actually killed a Jesuit to get the robes, so they should be celebrated, not eaten. And the Orellans agree. The whole passage is a fierce mockery of the Jesuit mission in Paraguay. Cacambo notes that the Jesuits are masters of everything, and the people have no money at all, exposing the whole colonial enterprise as enslavement disguised as religion.
After escaping cannibalism, Candide and Cacambo stumble upon a literal utopia, El Dorado. Why include a perfect world only to have the hero leave it?
The contrast is essential. It sets up the next great disappointment. They find this secret land, El Dorado. The streets are paved with precious stones. There are no priests, no courts. Everyone is happy. It's the closest thing to the idea of the best of all possible worlds.
Yet Candide leaves after only a month. Why reject perfection?
Because of irrational human desire. He's still obsessed with finding Cunegonde, and he believes that with El Dorado's gold, he can win her and regain his status in the real world. He chooses the delusion of romance and status over guaranteed happiness.
And of course, that wealth doesn't last.
Not at all. The narrative ruthlessly shows how transient wealth is. Over the next 100 days, they lose almost all the gold and the sheep that were carrying it. Candide even observes, nothing is more transient here below than riches.
But that lesson is immediately followed by one of the grimmest moments in the book, the encounter with the slave in Suriname.
This is where the dark humor gives way to unfiltered horror. It's the moment that finally breaks Candide's optimism for good. He meets a slave who is missing a hand and a leg.
And the slave explains why.
He explains the economics of it. If your finger gets caught in the sugar mill, they cut off your hand. If you try to run away, they cut off your leg. He says this cruelty is the price at which Europeans eat sugar.
And the slave recounts what his mother told him when he was sold.
It's heartbreaking. She told him to thank their gods, that he has the honor of becoming a slave of our masters, the white men, and that this will make his parents happy. It shows the complete devastation of the colonial mindset.
And this is the final straw for Candide.
It is. After that, he says he is compelled to renounce optimism for good.
With his optimism finally shattered, Candide gets a new companion, the pessimist Martin, and they head back to Europe. What final disillusionments are waiting for them there?
Martin is the opposite extreme of Pangloss. He just assumes everything is inherently bad. And their journey through Europe shows that both extremes are, well, untenable.
First, they see a military execution in Portsmouth.
A direct reference to the historical execution of Admiral John Byng. The admiral is shot not for cowardice, but for failing to engage the enemy closely enough. And it's done, as the narrator dryly states, to encourage the others.
Pour encourager les autres.
A ruthless satire of military futility and scapegoating.
Then they pivot from military cruelty to political triviality. They have dinner in Venice with 6 strangers who all turn out to be deposed kings.
Real historical figures.
Yes. Candide is amazed by the coincidence, but Martin just dismisses it, saying that the dethroning of kings is an everyday piece of business. It just shows how meaningless and unstable political power is.
Then there's Senator Pococurante, who represents the cultured elite.
Right. The rich Venetian noble who has everything, art, books, music, and is bored by all of it. He finds Raphael tedious, Homer and Milton flawed. He has access to all of human culture and finds it wanting.
It's a mockery of the boredom of aristocratic privilege. Nothing is ever good enough for the person who has everything.
It's a profound satire of cultural nihilism born from too much comfort. It shows that hyperanalysis and skepticism, taken to an extreme, lead to a sterile, meaningless existence. It's a failure just as profound as Pangloss's blind faith.
We've talked about the horrors, but the book is still funny, not tragic. Why is that? If this happened to real people, it would be devastating.
And that's a critical point. The characters aren't meant to be realistic. They're described as two-dimensional, mechanical, and even marionette-like. They are vessels for philosophical points.
So their lack of psychological depth is a deliberate philosophical joke.
Exactly. Voltaire is treating them like clockwork, satirizing the very idea of a mathematically perfect, well-ordered universe. If the universe is a machine, then the suffering in it is also mechanical, predictable, and ultimately ridiculous in its excess.
And they're basically indestructible.
Precisely. They are constantly, narrowly escaping death only to suffer again. Cunegonde becomes ugly. Pangloss survives being hanged because the hangman was bad at his job. He has to survive because the bad philosophy has to keep existing for the lesson to be driven home.
So their constant mechanical suffering is the method for destroying the notion of a well-ordered, benevolent universe.
It is.
The final setting is here, Constantinople, a place chosen to reinforce this theme of global instability. What happens there that finally lets Candide find his own answer?
They witness constant, petty, violent political upheaval. Officials are exiled and executed daily. It just hammers home the theme that power, like wealth and beauty, is transient and meaningless.
And in the middle of all this chaos, how do they find an answer?
They meet an honest old man sitting in his orange grove. Pangloss, being Pangloss, tries to engage him in abstract political debate. But the old man says he knows nothing about any of that. He's too busy working his land and selling his produce.
He's completely divorced from the chaos of power and speculation. His answer is just manual labor.
It's the ultimate rejection of the abstract life. Pangloss tries one last metaphysical argument, quoting scripture, but this time Candide the student has finally found his own voice.
And he says,
He cuts him off and says, I know also that our garden must be cultivated.
that famous line, "We must cultivate our garden."
It's the profound conclusion of the whole story. It's an argument for deeply practical action and labor as the only way to make life tolerable. It rejects all the futile debates of Pangloss and the bitter cynicism of Martin.
It's a radical turn to the concrete. Stop wondering why the world is bad, and instead focus on making your small part of it less bad through honest work.
Exactly. You can't control the earthquakes or the wars, but you can control what you plant in your own garden. And in that focus, you find a small measure of contentment.
This deep dive really reveals that Candide is so much more than a funny, violent story. It's a critical guidebook for living in a cruel world that still feels entirely relevant.
Absolutely. It established a tradition of using black humor for critical thinking. It proved that simplifying a philosophy to its most absurd conclusion is a powerful way to critique it, forcing you to see the gap between comfortable theory and brutal reality.
Let's give our listeners the central statements one last time as the key takeaways from this deep dive.
Okay. Takeaway 1 is the comprehensive rejection of optimism. Voltaire used this chaotic, horrific plot, the earthquake, the mutilated slave, to completely ridicule the Leibnizian idea that this is the best of all possible worlds. He showed that a philosophical acceptance of suffering is just untenable in the face of relentless, real-world evil.
Takeaway 2. The power of satire as a critical tool. The novella established black humor, rapid-fire pacing, and these mechanical characters as an incredibly effective tool for critique. The speed and extremity of the disasters are precisely what exposes the flaws in these grand doctrines and the hypocrisies of European institutions.
And finally, takeaway 3 is the practical command of labor. That final message, we must cultivate our garden, is Voltaire's call to action. It demands a shift away from metaphysical theorizing, the useless debates about cosmic purpose, to concrete, useful labor. It suggests that a tolerable life is found not in understanding the cosmic plan, but in productive work in our own small corner of the world.
A powerful and enduring message. Focus on what you can build and nurture, not what you can't explain or control. Thank you for guiding us through the treacherous but brilliantly funny world of Candide.
It was my pleasure, and I really do encourage everyone listening to revisit this classic. You'll be amazed at how much of our modern absurdity finds its roots right there, in Voltaire's 18th century indictment of complacency.